Blood seeps through rain-slick cobblestones, a trail that should have washed away years ago, yet tonight it returns, leading Detective Vane into a storm darker than the sea itself. Welcome to Audible Archives. I'm Rob, your host, and tonight we step into Ashford, a city where the storms never cleanse, they only stain deeper. In the red in the rain, Detective Drake Vane follows a trail of crimson washed into the cobblestones. A vanished artist, a woman in green, a bowler-hatted shadow, and a secret tied to Harcourt's legacy. The fog will not reveal truth willingly. Before we descend into Ashford's mist, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss the next case waiting in the rain.
Ashford's summer storms were the kind that could turn a day's work into a river of mud and soot. The sky was an iron lid, pressing down on the city. The tram lines hissed with wet, the smell of coal smoke clinging to the air like an old grudge. Drake Vane stepped off the tram at the Ashford seafront, his polished boots splashing into shallow puddles that mirrored the dull glow of the street lamps. The sea beyond the breakwater heaved restlessly, white spray leaping against the rocks. Even in the downpour, there was a crowd gathered at the railings. He didn't rush. He never did. Cases had a way of waiting for you whether you came at a sprint or a stroll. At the heart of the knot of onlookers was a narrow cobbled lane that sloped down toward the harbor. The lane should have been an unremarkable strip of weathered stone, gull droppings, chipped mortar, the kind of place a seafront painter might sketch in the spring. But tonight, the rainwater running down its center was tinged red. The whisper came from a woman in a fisherman's slicker. Blood, that is. Enough to fill a pail. Drake knelt, running a gloved fingertip over the cobbles. The crimson sheen was already breaking into ribbons under the rain. He raised it to the light, frowning. It wasn't fresh. It had that dark, oxidized look. Days old, maybe more. And yet, no one had noticed it until tonight. A uniformed constable, a young one, still nervous around detectives, stepped forward. "Evening, sir. Locals say it just appeared. Wasn't here an hour ago." "Blood doesn't just appear," Drake murmured. "It comes from somewhere. Or someone." He stood, eyes following the lane downward. At the end of it, the rain swept across a row of shuttered art studios, their windows plastered with salt spray and poster bills. One of them glowed faintly from within, a weak, amber light behind frosted glass. On the sign above the door, the paint was peeling but still legible. Eloise Harcourt, Marine Studies in Oils and Watercolors. Drake remembered the name. Harcourt had once exhibited in the Ashford Gallery up in the core. Critics had said she had a knack for capturing the sea's mood. That was before she vanished from the city's art scene and washed up here, in the seafront's quieter decay. The constable followed his gaze. "Miss Harcourt says she's been here all evening. Painting." Drake gave him a thin smile. "Let's ask her what colors she's been using." He crossed the wet cobbles, pushing open the studio door. The room smelled of turpentine, salt air, and something fainter, metallic. Canvases lined the walls, storms, shipwrecks, moonlit tides. Eloise Harcourt stood at her easel, brush in hand, auburn hair pinned up loosely. Her smock was spattered with deep crimson paint. Or at least, Drake thought it was paint. She looked up, eyes wide. "Detective. I didn't think the police would bother over a bit of seawater in the gutter." "It isn't seawater." Drake stepped closer, his gaze flicking from her brush to the half-finished canvas before her. The scene depicted the harbor in last night's storm, and on the slick cobblestones, a dark red pool. The detail was too precise to be imagination. Outside, the gulls cried and the rain poured on, washing away the stain that had brought him here. But Drake had already decided. The tide was carrying something far more dangerous into Ashford. Drake took a slow walk around Eloise Harcourt's studio, gloved hands behind his back. The floorboards creaked underfoot. In the corner, A paraffin heater ticked as it cooled. On the work table sat an enamel basin, brimming with murky water stained a faint rust red. "You clean your brushes with that?" he asked. Eloise hesitated, then nodded. "Cadmium red. It lingers in the water." Her voice was light, but her eyes were fixed on him in a way that betrayed calculation, as though she was painting his reaction in her mind. Drake dipped a finger into the water, sniffed. "Not cadmium." He set the basin back down. "You painted that scene from memory?" "Yes. Last night. I saw the tide come in from my window. The rain. It had that color." "That color," Drake repeated, "isn't seawater either." She didn't answer, only set her brush down and turned back to her easel. The conversation was over, or she wanted it to be. Drake stepped back into the rain. The constable was still by the railings, shivering in his slicker. "You've had anyone come forward?" "Not a soul. Except old Mrs. Pell, who swears she saw a woman in a green cloak running from the lane not long before the stain showed." "Running from?" Drake asked. The constable shrugged. "Could have been nothing. The storm was awful." Drake filed it away. In Ashford, nothing was ever nothing. The rain thinned to a cold drizzle as he made his way along the quay. Shops were shuttering, the air smelling of fried fish and damp rope. Down here, rumors traveled faster than the trams. At the dockside inn, an old fisherman named Reeve nursed a pint in the corner. He'd been around long enough to know which stories to tell. "A woman in green, you say?" Reeve rasped when asked. "I saw her. Not a local. Pale as the moon, and moving like she didn't want to be seen. She went toward the North Pier." "North Pier's derelict," Drake said. Reeve smiled without humor. "Exactly." The pier jutted out into black water, its planks slick with moss. Half the lamps along its length were dead. At the end, a small boathouse squatted against the wind. Drake approached, hearing the hollow slap of waves against the pilings. Inside, the place smelled of tar, rope, and mildew. Empty, except for a dark smear on the floorboards, half hidden beneath an old canvas sail. He pulled the sail back. Blood. Dried, dark, and in a pattern that suggested it hadn't dripped, it had been dragged. And there was something else, a small, enameled brooch in the shape of a gull, spattered with the same crimson. Drake slipped it into his pocket. Someone had brought blood to the cobbles, not the sea, and the woman in green had run from it. He looked out over the water. Fog was beginning to creep in from the horizon, swallowing the lighthouse beam. The tide was turning. Drake left the boathouse with the brooch in his pocket, the smell of old salt and iron clinging to his coat. The tide was swelling, licking higher at the pier supports. Somewhere out there in the fog, the gulls cried like old ghosts. The constable from the lane had trailed him. "Find something, sir?" "An empty room," Drake said, because the truth was a currency he spent sparingly. But our woman didn't vanish into thin air. The streets around the seafront were a maze. Narrow alleys, steep steps, passages under sagging timber beams. In bad weather, water ran through them like veins in a body. Tonight, the drizzle left them slick and echoing. He stopped at the corner where an alley dipped toward the market square. Something in the gutter caught the lamplight, a scrap of green wool, snagged on a rusted nail. He pinched it free. Not just green, sea green, a deep, expensive dye. This wasn't fisherman's garb. Whoever wore it had money, or someone who wanted her to look like she did. The market square was mostly deserted. A few traders covered their carts with tarps, hunching into the drizzle. On the far side, the sign of Rafferty's tea rooms swayed in the wind. Light glowed warmly inside. Drake stepped in, the bell over the door giving a weary jangle. The air smelled of overboiled cabbage and strong black tea. A handful of patrons turned to glance, then back to their cups. Behind the counter, Mrs. Rafferty herself, a barrel-shaped woman with an apron dusted in flour, raised an eyebrow. "Evenin', detective. Chasing trouble. Looking for a woman in a green cloak. Pale, dark hair, about." He gestured mid-height. Mrs. Rafferty pursed her lips. "Came in not 20 minutes ago. Sat in the back, kept her hood up. Left when the clock struck past. Headed toward the tram depot." Drake felt the city's map rearranging in his mind. The depot was a choke point, only 2 lines running this late, one inland toward the core, the other toward the dock sprawl. He reached the depot as the rain picked up again, drumming on the tin roof. The lamps hissed in the damp. A lone tram stood at the platform, steam curling from its undercarriage. Through the fogged glass, he scanned the few passengers. No green cloak. The conductor shook his head. "Only folk I've had tonight are old dockhands and one gent in a bowler hat." Drake frowned. Either she'd boarded before him, or she'd taken the third option, the river. The riverbank path was treacherous in the wet, lined with warehouses whose windows glowed faintly through the mist. He heard the low cough of an engine ahead, a small motor launch pulling away from a hidden jetty. A shadowy figure in a green cloak stood in the stern, head bowed. Beside her, a man handled the tiller. The launch turned toward the black mouth of the estuary and was swallowed by fog. Drake lit a cigarette, the ember flaring against the night. The city was showing him just enough to keep him chasing. And he intended to chase. By morning, the fog hadn't lifted, it had thickened, coiling through Ashford streets like smoke from an unseen fire. Drake stood on the riverbank, scarf drawn tight, brass watch ticking in his pocket. He replayed the sight of that small launch vanishing into the estuary. Ashford had dozens of hidden jetties, but only a handful in that stretch could take a boat at low tide without scraping bottom. He marked them mentally, starting with the nearest, a slipway behind a defunct sardine cannery. The cannery smelled of rust and brine. Its cracked windows were latticed with salt stains, and the brickwork wore the mildew of a decade's neglect. Yet the slipway behind it bore fresh marks, twin wet grooves where a keel had dragged up onto the boards not 12 hours ago. Kneeling, Drake found footprints leading away, one set small, the other broad and heavy. The smaller prints stopped abruptly near the cannery's side door. The door itself hung on one hinge, swinging faintly in the river breeze. Inside, the light was poor, filtering through grimy panes. Dust lay thick in most places, except for a clear track to a stairwell leading up. Halfway up the steps, Drake spotted it, a shard of green glass, no bigger than his thumbnail, glittering in the dimness. He pocketed it. Not bottle glass, this had the clarity of jewelry. Upstairs, the cannery offices were stripped bare. One room held only a warped desk, on which sat a chipped teacup half full of cold, sweet tea. He touched the side, still faintly warm. Someone had been here not long before him. A sudden noise made him freeze, the faint scrape of a boot on wood. Drake moved silently to the far doorway, peering into the hall. A man in a bowler hat was descending the stairs, his right hand buried in the pocket of his coat in a way Drake didn't like. Drake let him pass the landing, then followed. The man stepped into the fog outside, pausing to scan the river. When Drake was close enough to smell the damp wool of his coat, he spoke. "Out early, aren't we?" The man jolted, spinning halfway, eyes narrowing. "I'm looking for someone." "Green cloak?" Drake asked. A pause. "Never heard of her." The lie was thin as mist. But before Drake could press, the man melted into the fog, his footsteps quickening toward the street. Chasing him now would be useless. The fog would swallow them both. Back at the quay, Drake lit a cigarette and stared into the gray wall over the water. Somewhere beyond it, the woman in green was still moving, and the bowler-hatted man was too. And between them lay a brooch, a smear of blood, and a shard of green glass. By noon, Drake was standing under the gilt-lettered awning of Aldwick & Son, jewelers in Ashford Core. The glass-fronted store gleamed like a lighthouse in the gray day, all polished wood and brass fittings. He laid the green shard on the counter, cut to match a cabochon setting. Who bought the stone it came from? Mr. Aldwick himself, a man whose suit creased only where it was meant to, picked it up with tweezers. He turned it in the light, lips pursing. "Colombian emerald," he said finally. "Exceptional clarity. Only a handful like it passed through here in a year." "And this year?" Drake asked. "One sale, 6 months ago, to a Mr. Francis Harcourt." The name slid into Drake's mind like a cold knife. Eloise Harcourt, the woman last seen on the quay before the brooch's appearance. Drake leaned an elbow on the counter. What was the setting? A pendant, framed in platinum. Mr. Harcourt insisted on a locket-style back, unusual for a stone like this. Aldwick's brow creased. "Is it damaged?" "Not yet," Drake said. "But I think the owner might be." He stepped back into the street, rain slicking the cobbles, and crossed into an alley to smoke. The Harcourt name carried weight in Ashford: old shipping money, land holdings, influence on the dock councils. If Eloise had been wearing that emerald, and it had shattered, then whatever happened on the quay wasn't just street crime. The bowler man might have been Harcourt's fixer, or something else entirely. The tram took him back toward the quay. The fog had eased, revealing the gray line of the horizon. Dockhands moved crates under the watch of foremen in oilskins. At the far end, a coal barge was unloading. Drake approached a stevedore he knew, a red-haired man named Callan. "You see a launch come in last night?" "Small. 2 aboard." Callan scratched his beard. "I slipped in round midnight. Didn't tie up long." The man went inside Rafferty's for a bottle. The woman, she stayed on the boat. Looked cold. Or scared. "Did she leave with him?" Callan shook his head. "No. He came back out alone. Boat was gone." That meant she'd left without the bowlerman, and with someone else. The list of people who could move unnoticed between quay and river at night was short. Most worked for the docks, or for those who controlled them, and in Ashford, the line between the two was paper-thin. The upstream docks were quieter, the kind of place where the river's smell was more mud than salt. Here, sheds leaned on each other for support, and the water lapped at rotting pilings like an old dog licking a wound. Drake followed the path along the embankment until he came to the place Callan's directions suggested. A squat timber boathouse, its roof sagging, windows boarded. Someone had tried to keep people out. It hadn't worked. The padlock on the side door hung snapped, fresh metal exposed where the shackle had been cut. Inside, the air was damp and cold. The river whispered beneath the planks. In the far corner, a small table held a candle burned halfway down and a teacup gone cold. Beside it lay something stranger, a folded scrap of oilskin tied with twine. Drake untied it carefully. Inside was a single page torn from a sketchbook. Pencil lines, hasty but skilled, showed the outline of Ashford's northern wharf, and a figure in a long cloak standing beside a tramline pole. At the bottom, in hurried script, "Meet me where the fog begins." No name, no date, but the pressure of the pencil suggested it was written in haste, and by someone used to making marks, not writing letters. He slipped the note into his coat. The phrase stuck in his mind. Where the fog begins wasn't poetic. Not here. It meant a place, a fixed point where river mist always gathered, tide after tide. There was one such spot upriver, the bend near St. Vane's Bridge, where cold water from the hills met the warmer tidal flow. As he stepped back out, he caught the faint crunch of gravel behind him. He turned. Nothing, just the slow drift of mist over the water. But a few yards away, a fresh cigarette but smoldered on the path. Someone had been watching the boathouse. By the time he reached the street, Drake's mind was working in layers. The emerald shard, the blood, the woman in green, and now a rendezvous point in the fog. He didn't believe in coincidences. Not in Ashford. And if the bowler man was still in the city, he'd be heading to the same place. Night settled over Ashford like a slow curtain, and with it came the fog, rolling in from the river in pale sheets, swallowing lamps until they glowed like half-drowned moons. St. Vane's Bridge loomed in the mist, its black iron ribs vanishing into nothingness at either end. Beneath, the river moved with a sound like breathing. Drake leaned on the rail, collar up, waiting. His brass watch ticked into the damp air. The note had been clear. Meet me where the fog begins. This was that place, the bend where river and tide met, mist blooming like smoke from an unseen fire. At first, the sound was only a whisper, soft steps on the wet boards. Then she emerged from the gray, the woman in green, cloak drawn close, hood shadowing her face. Her eyes caught the lamplight for an instant, bright as mercury. She stopped 6 feet away. "You found it," she said, voice low, careful. "I wasn't sure you would." "I've been following you since the quay," Drake replied. "That brooch, the blood, you want to explain?" She hesitated, gaze sliding past him toward the far end of the bridge. "Not here." "He's close." From the mist behind her came another shape, tall, broad-shouldered, hat brim low. The bowler man. Drake stepped forward, but the woman moved faster, slipping a folded envelope into his hand. "If you want the truth," she said quickly, "don't follow me. Follow what's in here." Then she turned, vanishing into the fog with the bowler man right behind her, though whether he was chasing or escorting her, Drake couldn't tell. He waited until the echoes of their steps faded before looking at the envelope. It was unmarked, the paper damp at the edges. Inside was a single photograph, sepia and old, showing the northern wharf, years before, with a group of dockhands posed in front of a cargo crate. One face stood out, the bowler man, younger but unmistakable. And behind him, stamped faintly on the crate, Harcourt. The dock archives were kept in a narrow brick building at the edge of the furnace quarter, its windows clouded with years of coal dust. Inside, the air smelled of paper, rope, and tar, the scent of Ashford's history. Old Ben, the archivist, sat hunched behind a desk, glasses perched low on his nose. He'd been on the docks longer than the rust on the bollards. Drake laid the photograph in front of him. "Recognize the mark?" Ben squinted, tracing the faded stamp with a finger. "HARC. Harcourt Shipping. Old man Harcourt used to send crates like these all over the colonies. Before the sun took over." "Francis Harcourt," Drake said. Ben's mouth tightened. That one never set a foot on the wharf unless it was to settle a debt or cause one. "What's this about?" "Maybe murder," Drake replied. "And the bowler man?" Ben tapped the figure in the photograph. Tom Vale, foreman for Harcourt. Kept his mouth shut and his fists busy. Rumor was, Harcourt trusted him with jobs no one else would take. Drake leaned closer. "What kind of jobs?" Ben hesitated. "The sort where the cargo screamed if you opened the crate." The words hung in the air. Drake thought of the woman in green, her urgency, her fear. Any record of where these crates went? Ben shuffled through ledgers until he pulled one free, ink faded, pages curling. He jabbed a finger at a line. Crate number 407, machinery, destination, Runswick Bay. Date, 12 years ago. Runswick Bay. Drake asked. That's miles up the coast. No reason for Harcourt to send cargo there, no port, no industry. Just cliffs and fishermen. Drake folded the photograph. And maybe the truth. Outside, the fog was lifting, revealing a narrow slice of moon. Runswick Bay was a day's travel, but if the bowler man and the woman in green were connected to whatever had been in that crate, they might be heading there already. And in Ashford, when people vanished toward the coast, they didn't always come back. Runswick Bay wasn't on any proper map, not the kind you could buy in a shop. You found it by following the coast road until the tarmac gave up and the cliffs started leaning over the sea like they wanted to fall in. The village was little more than a scatter of stone cottages, nets drying on the walls, gulls screaming overhead. The air had that sharp salt bite that made your eyes water and your lungs feel clean and raw all at once. Drake asked around in the only pub, a place that smelled of beer, smoke, and wet rope. The locals didn't warm easily, but one old fisherman, his skin like driftwood, remembered Harcourt's crates. "Aye," he said, nursing a half pint. "We helped unload one off a trawler years back. Heavy, it was. No markings but that HARC stamp. Left it at the old tide shed. Then one night, gone. No cart tracks, no boat. Just gone." The tide shed was still there, down a narrow path along the rocks. Half collapsed, roof sagging, door gone. Inside was nothing but sand, shells, and the wind. Drake stepped back outside and froze. At the base of the cliff, where the tide had pulled away, something jutted from the stones, a corner of rotting wood, black with age. The sea had stripped away part of a crate. He climbed down, boots slipping on wet rocks. The crate was wedged tight between boulders, its sides split open. Inside, beneath layers of decayed straw, lay a tarnished metal idol, its surface green with corrosion. Astarte, the Phoenician goddess. And on the inside of the crate's plank, carved deep and rough, were two letters, VG. Footsteps crunched on the rocks behind him. Drake turned, hand on his coat pocket, ready for the Webley. It was the bowler man alone. Hat low, coat buttoned. "You've gone too far, detective," he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes flicked toward the idol. "That doesn't belong to you. Or anyone here." Drake stood his ground. Then why was it buried? The bowler man's jaw tightened. Because some things shouldn't be found. The bowler man stepped closer, boots scraping over wet stone. Behind him, the waves were already beginning to hiss higher against the rocks. The tide had turned, and in this bay, it came in fast, like a trap springing shut. Drake kept his stance loose, hands free but near his coat. "If it's so dangerous," he said, "why's Harcourt sending men to guard it?" The bowler man didn't flinch. "I don't work for Harcourt anymore. Haven't in years. That photograph says otherwise." A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. "I did jobs for him, yes. But this wasn't about money. It's older than Harcourt. Older than you or me. That thing's been moved across continents, through wars. Every time someone tries to keep it, something happens." The wind was picking up, carrying spray that stung the eyes. Drake could hear the rush of the incoming tide filling the narrow channel behind him. "Where's the woman in green?" Drake asked. The bowler man's jaw tightened. "Gone. Better you don't follow her either. That's not how I work. The man stepped forward again, blocking the path back to the cliff stairs. Then this is where you stop working. It happened quickly, a faint clatter from above, then a shape dropping down the cliffside like a shadow loosed from its moorings. The woman in green landed lightly on the rocks, a revolver in her hand. "Move," she said to the bowler man, her voice cold. For a moment, all three of them stood with the tide swirling closer, the idol's corroded face staring sightless from the crate. Then the bowler man backed away, muttering something under his breath that the wind tore away. The woman's eyes flicked to Drake. "If you want to live, help me get this thing off the rocks. Now." Drake glanced at the crate, the foaming water already licking its sides. "And where exactly are we taking it?" "Somewhere the tide can't reach," she said. "And no one else either." The waves were climbing faster than they could work. Every surge sent cold water to Drake's knees, soaking through the wool of his trousers, making the rocks slick as oil. The woman in green wedged herself beside the crate, shoving against it with all her strength. "Lift on 3, she shouted over the roar. 1, 2. The next wave smashed into them, nearly knocking Drake sideways. He dug in his boots and hauled. The idol was heavier than it looked, its corroded bulk shifting reluctantly. They half dragged, half carried it toward the cliff steps, the tide chasing them like a pack of dogs. By the time they reached the base of the stairs, water was slapping at their heels. Drake took the top first, his breath misting in the cold night air. The woman followed, the idol cradled between them. She moved with the determination of someone who'd been here before, someone who knew exactly where she was going. At the top of the cliff, the wind tore at their coats. The path inland was narrow, flanked by gorse and heather, the moon just bright enough to silver the edges. Drake was about to ask her where they were headed when a figure stepped from the shadow of a gnarled tree. Old oilskin coat, lantern in one hand, a double-barrel shotgun in the other. "Put it down," the man said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were fixed on the idol with something between fear and hunger. The woman froze. "Ewan," she said softly. Drake's mind clicked. The fisherman from the pub, the one who'd spoken of Harcourt's crate. Ewan's gaze shifted to Drake. "You've brought it where it doesn't belong, city man. I'll give you one chance to leave it here and walk away." Drake kept his voice even. "And if we don't?" Ewan's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Then the sea won't be the only thing burying you." The wind howled between them, carrying the salt stink of the sea. Drake watched the fisherman's knuckles whiten on the shotgun stock. He'd seen that same tension before, in the army, in alleys behind Ashford docks, the split second before someone chose between pulling a trigger and letting go. The woman in green shifted her stance, subtly edging her coat aside to free her revolver. Drake spoke first. "Ewan, you said the crate was gone before. If you had your chance to be rid of it once, why try to take it now?" The fisherman's eyes flicked to him, then back to the idol. "Because last time, the tide took it before the wrong hands could. You bring it ashore, you wake its shadow. The old stories, they're not just stories." A wave crashed far below, the sound like stone breaking. "You think I believe in curses?" Drake asked. "I don't care what you believe," Ewan said. "I've seen what happens when this thing changes hands. Drownings, fires, folks vanishing like mist." The woman in green's voice was flat. "You sound like my father." That stopped Ewan cold. His eyes widened. "You're Alice." The revolver lowered an inch. "And you're still chasing ghosts," she said. For a heartbeat, it was only the wind and the sea. Then Drake stepped forward, putting himself between them. "Whatever it is," he said, "it's not staying here to cause another death. But it's not going back to Harcourt either." Ewan studied him for a long moment. Then, with a muttered curse, he swung the barrels skyward and fired both shots into the night. The blasts echoed across the cliffs. "Take it," he said, "but don't bring it back." They left Runswick Bay before dawn, the idol wrapped in a tarpaulin in the back of a borrowed truck. Drake drove, the woman in green silent beside him. The road curved inland, away from the salt air, toward the misty moors. Halfway to Ashford, she finally spoke. "You still don't know the pavement stain, do you?" Drake glanced at her. "Enlighten me." "It's not from murder," she said. "It's from when they tried to move this idol through Ashford the first time. A cart overturned, right there in the market square. The crate split, and the red that ran into the cobblestones wasn't all paint." She didn't explain further, and Drake didn't press. Some truths, he knew, had to sit in the dark a while before they made sense. When they reached the city, he drove not to the station but to a locked warehouse in the furnace quarter, one that only he had the key to. The idol went inside, under canvas, in a steel cage. For now, it was out of reach. For now, Ashford could breathe easy. But Drake knew the city well enough to recognize when something wasn't over, just waiting.
Ashford never gives back more than it takes. You've just heard The Red in the Rain, an Audible Archives original mystery written by Raul. If the storm has left its mark on you, then like this episode, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe, so Drake Vane's next pursuit finds you first. The rain may have thinned, but the city's shadows are only beginning to stir.
Another chapter closes, but the archives remain, waiting for the next seeker of stories. Here, no voice is lost, no tale truly ends. This is Audible Archives. Until we meet again, may your mind wander freely and your heart never forget the stories we share.